18. Gay Black Stars Erased from History by Hollywood. Hollywood's golden age lied to you. They sold you a world of straight white heroes, tragic starlets, and tidy love stories while hiding a whole constellation of black, gay, and queer legends in the shadows. Some won Oscars. Some built their own studios. Some changed dance and music forever. But their lovers were cropped out of the frame, their truths buried in footnotes or erased outright. On Legends of Black Excellence, we're breaking that script. If you're ready to see who history tried to hide from you, hit subscribe, drop A in the comments, and let's drag these stolen legends back into the spotlight. Paul Winfield. Hollywood loves neat legends and straight lines, but the real golden age was crowded with shadows, secrets, and far more queerness than the studios ever admitted. Behind posters of flawless straight couples were black, gay, and queer artists whose lives were quietly cut away so their work could be safely sold. Singers like Johnny Mathis and Ethel Waters, dancers like Alvin Ailey, actors like Brock Peters and Canada Lee, their names could be printed on marquees, but their loves, their chosen families, their late-night communities were pushed off the page. Studio press releases stayed vague. Interviews dodged personal questions, and biographies blurred out anything that didn't fit the safe heterosexual image. Hollywood wanted their talent, their voices, their box office draw, just not the truth of who they were. In the middle of that hidden constellation stands Paul Winfield. Born in 1939, he spent years climbing through television guest spots and supporting roles before exploding onto the screen in Sounder 1972 as Nathan Lee Morgan, a black sharecropper father in Depression-era Louisiana. That performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, making him one of the very few black men recognized in that category at the time. On paper, he was exactly what Hollywood claimed to celebrate: serious, gifted, respectable. Off-screen, he built a life with architect Charles Gillen Jr., a relationship that lasted roughly 3 decades. They shared a home, a world, and eventually even a burial plot. Yet during Winfield's lifetime, their bond was treated more as a whispered understanding than an open truth. He never staged a fake romance for the cameras, but he also was never allowed in that era to stand in front of them and say plainly, "I am a black gay man and a leading actor." His story rhymes with so many others from that lost queer archive. Ethel Waters sharing a home and a life with dancer Ethel Williams in 1920s Harlem. Johnny Mathis risking his career with a single candid line about homosexuality. Alvin Ailey pouring his whole being into dances about liberation, while his AIDS-related death was softened on paper to spare his family stigma. Each life is another proof that black queer presence in the golden age was not a rare anomaly, but a constant undercurrent deliberately blurred. Paul Winfield, whose face could tower 3 stories high on a movie screen while his love stayed strictly off-record, embodies those 2 parallel histories: the official Hollywood story bathed in safe light and the truer, deeper saga of black gay stars who kept shining even as the industry tried to dim them. Ethel Waters. Hollywood's golden age liked its women one-way, glamorous, tragic, and very, very straight on paper. Ethel Waters refused to fit that frame from the moment she walked on stage. Born in 1896 and raised in brutal poverty, she clawed her way from backroom stages to become one of the most important black entertainers of the 20th century. In the 1920s, she ruled the nightclub circuit, then conquered Broadway with songs like Stormy Weather and Supper Time, using her voice to talk about grief, racism, and hunger long before protest music was a genre. By the 1940s, she was breaking Hollywood itself, a magnetic presence in films like Cabin in the Sky and Pinky, where she became only the 2nd black actor ever nominated for an Academy Award. Later, she made TV history as the first black person with her own television special and the first black woman nominated for a Primetime Emmy. But if you only read the safe official biographies, you'd think Ethel Waters' story was a straight line of hardship, success, and religion. The missing piece is the woman who shared her life when her career was exploding: dancer Ethel Williams. In 1920s Harlem, they lived together, performed together, and were known in lesbian circles as the Two Ethels, a nickname that only makes sense if people around them understood they were more than roommates. On stage, they were an electric duo. Offstage, they moved through a queer black world of blues singers, chorus girls, and artists who carved out pockets of freedom inside a violently segregated America. Waters did marry men 3 times in total, but the relationship that keeps surfacing in queer histories is the one with Williams, the one the mainstream record tried hardest to forget. As she grew older, Waters turned toward evangelical Christianity, singing at Billy Graham crusades and leaning into a respectability that made her more palatable to white America. That later image, pious, stern, a reformed star, helped bury the memory of the young woman who danced through Harlem nightclubs with her girlfriend on her arm. Yet the facts remain: a black woman who broke barriers in film, Broadway, radio, and television, also loved women and moved confidently through lesbian circles when it was dangerous to do so. In a list of black, gay, and queer stars, the Golden Age tried to edit out Ethel Waters isn't a footnote. She's one of the main characters whose full, complicated life finally demands to be sung in her own key. Noble Johnson. In the official story of Hollywood's Golden Age, Noble Johnson barely gets a passing mention if he appears at all. And yet this tall, striking black actor from Missouri was there almost from the beginning, standing just off to the side while film history was being written. Born in 1881 in Marshall, Missouri, and raised partly in Colorado Springs, he went to school with future horror legend Lon Chaney. Both men eventually landed in Hollywood, but only one became a myth. Johnson, with his 6'2" frame and regal bearing, worked constantly, drifting through the silent era into sound films as if he were part of the studio infrastructure itself. Look closely at the credits, and you'll see him everywhere in epic spectacles like intolerance biblical dramas like The Ten Commandments, adventure fantasies like The Thief of Baghdad, classic horror, like the Mummy Jungle blockbusters, like King Kong, and dozens more. Often he was uncredited, buried under makeup, or cast as an exotic other Arab native African chief, anything but a modern black man with a full interior life. By the end of his career, he had appeared in well over 100 films, a working actor who helped hold up the scaffolding of Hollywood while remaining nearly invisible in its mythology. What truly sets Noble Johnson apart, though, is that he didn't just act in movies. He tried to change what movies could be. In 1916, together with his brother and other partners, he founded the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, one of the first black-owned film studios in the United States. Lincoln's aim was radical for its time, to show black people as ordinary citizens, professionals, families, dreamers, rather than the racist caricatures the major studios served up. Johnson served as president, starred in the films, and poured his Hollywood earnings back into the company. Within a few years, the brutal economics of distribution and the stranglehold of white-run studios forced Lincoln to close. Very little is documented about Noble Johnson's private life, which has led to a lot of speculation and projection. What isn't speculation is this: he was a black man in the heart of early Hollywood who tried to seize creative power in a system built to deny it to him, and his role as a pioneer has been quietly sidelined ever since. In any honest account of the black stars that Hollywood erased, his name deserves to be spoken loudly. Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker is often remembered as the woman in the banana skirt, all feathers glitter and jazz age excess. But the real story is far bigger and far queerer than that costume suggests. Born Frida Josephine McDonald in St. Louis in 1906, she escaped poverty and racism in the United States to become a superstar in 1920s Paris. On the Folies Bergère stage, she reinvented herself as a black Venus, dancing half-nude with a belt of fake bananas and turning racist caricature on its head. If Europe wanted to fetishize blackness, she would profit from it, control it, and bend it to her own power. Behind the spectacle was a razor-sharp businesswoman and artist who understood exactly what she was doing. As her fame grew, so did her life off stage. Baker became the first black woman to star in a major motion picture, the 1927 silent film Siren of the Tropics, and later used that same glamour as cover to work as a spy for the French resistance during World War II, smuggling messages in sheet music and performing for Allied troops. After the war, she adopted 12 children of different backgrounds, her rainbow tribe, and refused to perform for segregated audiences in the U.S., marching for civil rights and speaking at the 1963 March on Washington. In 2021, France symbolically inducted her into the Pantheon, making her the first black woman honored in that national temple of heroes. Official proof that this once poor dancer from Missouri had become part of the country's moral history. Running through all of this largely edited out of mainstream tellings is Josephine Baker's queerness. Married to 4 different men, she also had romantic and sexual relationships with women, including high-profile figures like French writer Colette and, by many accounts, Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. Biographers and her own son have described her frankly as bisexual. Yet for decades, popular narratives highlighted only her husbands, her resistance medals, her children, the safe parts of her story. In a conversation about black gay and queer stars that Hollywood and history tried to straighten out, Josephine Baker stands as a dazzling contradiction, a global icon whose image was everywhere, and whose full, messy bisexual truth was deliberately kept just out of frame. Johnny Mathis. If you only knew Johnny Mathis from the way his records played at weddings and slow dances, you'd think he was the safest man in the world. Born in 1935 to a black working-class family in Texas and raised in San Francisco, he came of age just as the crooner era was cresting. While his classmates were thinking about college, Mathis was already being courted by Columbia Records. By the mid-1950s, he was on national television, and songs like Chances Are Misty and It's Not For Me to Say were drifting out of radios everywhere. He became one of the first black male singers to truly cross over into white middle America living rooms, his face on album covers, his voice soundtracking first kisses and anniversaries. Over the decades, his album sales climbed into the hundreds of millions, putting him in the rare company of the best-selling artists of the 20th century. But built into that success was a paradox. Johnny Mathis was selling romance to a world that assumed and demanded that he be straight. His public image was carefully polished, the polite private gentleman with the velvet voice, and the press rarely pushed hard on his personal life. That fragile truce shattered in 1982 when he gave an interview in which he reportedly said that homosexuality was a way of life he'd grown accustomed to. At a time when homophobia was still casual and vicious, especially toward black men, the backlash was swift and frightening. Mathis later spoke about receiving death threats and about how badly that one candid line landed in the world he was living in. The quote disappeared from circulation. The industry and Mathis himself simply stopped talking about it for a long time. What makes Johnny Mathis central to the story of black gay stars the industry tried to erase isn't that he lived loudly. It's that he didn't and couldn't. Here was a black man whose voice defined straight romance for generations, quietly carrying a truth that the culture had no room for. In later years, as attitudes shifted, he became more relaxed and open about being a gay man. But by then, much of his legend had already been written without that piece of him. His life sits at the uneasy intersection of desire and denial, adored for songs about love, yet pushed for decades to live his own love story in parentheses. Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey rewrote what dance could say long before the world was ready to hear what his own life was saying. Born in 1931 in rural Texas, raised by a single mother in the shadow of Jim Crow, he carried memories of church services, blues joints, and back-breaking cotton fields into every step he choreographed. When he founded the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater in 1958, it wasn't just another company. It was a radical declaration that black stories, black bodies, and black spiritual traditions belonged at the center of modern dance. Works like Revelations turned the pain and faith of Black America into movement so powerful that audiences who had never lived that history still felt it in their bones. Behind that public genius was a private life that had to move more cautiously. Ailey was a Black gay man in mid-20th century America, working in an industry that loved to borrow the intensity of queer creativity, but rarely welcomed queer people living honestly. Inside the dance world, many understood who he was and who he loved, but the wider public met only the carefully neutral word bachelor, the respectable genius with no visible romantic life. His choreography pulsed with desire, loneliness, and liberation. Yet interviews sidestepped questions about partners, and official profiles focused on his work as if the man himself began and ended in the rehearsal studio. The cruelest twist came at the end. In 1989, at just 58 years old, Alvin Ailey died of AIDS-related complications at the height of a pandemic that was already decimating queer communities. Knowing how vicious the stigma was, especially for a Black mother in a homophobic, racist society, he asked his doctor to list a vague blood disorder on the records instead. Even in death, he was protecting the people he loved from the world that had never fully accepted him. Today, his company tours the globe and his dances are canon. But the full truth, Black, brilliant, gay, and forced into partial shadow, is only now being spoken aloud. In any honest roll call of Black gay stars, the Golden Age tried to blur Alvin Ailey's name has to be near the top. Canada Lee. Canada Lee is one of those names that should be shouted whenever people talk about great American actors, yet he's mostly a ghost in mainstream film history. Born Leonard Lionel Cornelius Kanagata in New York in 1907, he first found fame not on stage, but in the boxing ring, becoming a well-known lightweight in the 1920s. When an eye injury ended his sports career, he reinvented himself as an actor, throwing the same discipline he'd taken into the ring onto the stage. By the early 1940s, he was a major Black presence in American theater, starring in Richard Wright's Native Son on Broadway, and using his roles to challenge the racist stereotypes that still dominated the stage. Hollywood came calling, but even there, he refused to play small. In Alfred Hitchcock's Lifeboat 1944, Lee's character isn't a shuffling caricature, but a complex, dignified sailor whose humanity is undeniable. In Cry the Beloved Country, 1951, he played the anguished Reverend Stephen Kumalo, bringing quiet power to a story about apartheid at a time when American audiences weren't eager to confront racial injustice anywhere, let alone abroad. Off-screen Canada Lee was equally outspoken. He supported civil rights causes, opposed segregation in the entertainment industry, and used his growing influence to fight for better, fuller roles for Black performers. That outspokenness, combined with his association with leftist artists and intellectuals, made him a target during the Red Scare. In the early 1950s, he was named in anti-communist publications and effectively blacklisted from film and radio work, drying up just as he should have been entering his prime. He died of a heart attack in 1952 at only 45. Where does queerness enter this story? Carefully. There is no firm documented coming out, no surviving love letters that settle the question. But some queer historians and readers of his life have noted patterns that feel familiar: intense, long-term friendships with male writers and activists, a personal life kept unusually guarded, and an industry willing to weaponize any deviation from the norm race. Politics rumored sexuality to push a Black man out. Whether Canada Lee was gay, bi, or straight, what is clear is that he was too much for his time. Too Black, too politically bold, too unwilling to play the roles he was supposed to play. In a roll call of Black stars whose full selves were squeezed off the record, his absence from the spotlight feels less like an accident and more like a verdict. Raymond St. Jacques. Raymond St. Jacques was the kind of presence you remember even if you don't remember his name. Tall, elegant, and fiercely self-possessed, he moved through Hollywood and television at a time when Black men were still being pushed into the background, then did something no one had done before him. Born James Arthur Johnson in Hartford, Connecticut in 1930, he trained seriously as an actor and built his craft on stage before cameras ever found him. By the mid-1960s, he broke a barrier that sounds almost absurd. Today, he became the first black actor to have a regular role on a primetime Western series playing cattle drover Simon Blake in the final season of Rawhide. For an audience raised on white cowboys and invisible black labor, simply seeing a black man ride with the herd every week was quietly revolutionary. But St. Jacques never settled for being just a token rider in someone else's story. Through the late 1960s and 70s, he stacked up credits in films like Cotton Comes to Harlem, Come Back Charleston Blue, and his own passion project Book of Numbers, which he produced, directed, and starred in. He used his success to speak out about the industry's racism, publicly calling out the great white void he saw in movies like Star Wars and fighting for more than just a handful of stereotyped roles. Off-screen, he taught acting and fencing, mentored younger black performers, and raised 2 sons, including Sterling St. Jacques, who would become a model and nightlife star in his own right. The question of queerness around Raymond St. Jacques is softer, more in the realm of coded history than confirmed label. Some later accounts frame his relationship to Sterling as more complicated than a straightforward father-son bond. Others emphasize how carefully he kept his own romantic life off the record in an era when being openly gay and black in Hollywood could end a career overnight. What is clear is that he lived on a tightrope, too outspoken, too proud, too unwilling to shrink himself into the background. As the first black regular on a TV Western and a vocal critic of Hollywood's exclusions, he fits squarely among the black stars whose full complex selves, political, emotional, and possibly queer, were sanded down by the official version of Golden Age history. Brock Peters. Brock Peters is one of those actors whose voice and face you recognize instantly, even if you don't know his name. Born George Fisher in New York City in 1927, to West Indian parents, he came up through music and theater before landing his breakout film role as the doomed Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962. In that performance, he poured a terrifying, heartbreaking dignity into a black man falsely accused of raping a white woman. His scenes on the witness stand are still studied today as some of the most searing acting of the era. Before and after that, he appeared in landmark films like Carmen Jones and Porgy and Bess, and later became a genre icon in his own right, with roles in Star Trek IV, Star Trek VI, and Deep Space Nine. His voice, deep and resonant, carried him into narration and voice work too, making him a steady presence across radio animation and audiobooks. Like many black performers of his generation, Peters navigated an industry that wanted him powerful on screen but controlled off it. He spoke out against racism in Hollywood, took roles that complicated stereotypes rather than feeding them, and built a long, steady career in a business that usually treated black actors as disposable. In his personal life, though, he was not the mysterious, forever single figure some internet narratives now imagine. He married Dolores Daniels in 1961, and they remained together until her death more than 40 years later. They had a daughter, Lysa. By all reliable accounts, he was a devoted husband and father, and he never publicly identified as gay or bisexual. That matters especially in a conversation about black gay stars the industry erased. It can be tempting to claim every intense, dignified black man from the Golden Age as secretly queer, especially when so many did have to hide. But with Brock Peters, there simply isn't solid evidence to support that label. Only the fact that he played characters who carried enormous emotional weight and lived his own life with a quiet, self-protective privacy. What is beyond dispute is his importance, a black actor who brought psychological depth to roles at a time when the system tried to deny him complexity. His story belongs in any serious history of black artists in mid-century Hollywood, not as a confirmed gay icon, but as a reminder that erasure can happen even when you play one of the most unforgettable roles ever put on film. Juano Hernandez. Juano Hernandez was one of the first truly great black screen actors. and yet his name rarely appears when people list the legends of Hollywood's golden age. Born Juan G. Hernandez in San Juan, Puerto Rico in 1896 to a Puerto Rican father and a Brazilian mother, he spent his youth working as a sailor, an acrobat in a circus, and even a boxer under the ring name Kid Curly. Eventually, he drifted to New York, where he sang in church choirs, performed in vaudeville and minstrel shows, and honed his voice on radio dramas. By the late 1920s, he was on Broadway, starting in the chorus of Showboat and moving into serious plays that demanded more than stereotypes from their black performers. On film, Hernandez became a quiet revolutionary. After early roles in race films aimed at black audiences, he broke into mainstream Hollywood with Intruder in the Dust, 1949, playing Lucas Beauchamp, a black farmer in Mississippi falsely accused of murdering a white man. At about 50 years old in his first major studio role, he delivered a performance so powerful it earned him a Golden Globe nomination for New Star of the Year. He followed it with a string of complex characters in films like Young Man with a Horn, The Breaking Point stars in My Crown Trial, The Pawnbroker, The Reavers and They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, often playing men of dignity and moral weight at a time when Hollywood usually offered black actors only comic relief or servitude. Unlike some of his contemporaries, there's no solid evidence that Juano Hernandez identified as gay or queer. He married Heidi Bello Paoli and had children, and the historical record doesn't clearly point toward a hidden same-sex life. What connects him to the larger story of black stars erased by Hollywood is the way his groundbreaking work has been pushed to the edges of film history. He was an Afro-Puerto Rican pioneer, a bridge between Black American cinema and Latin American roots, an actor whose talent was obvious to critics, and yet whose name never fully entered the canon. In any honest look back at the Golden Age, his presence proves that black brilliance was there from the start, even when the spotlight refused to stay on him. Frederick O'Neal. Frederick O'Neal is one of those names that explains why the story of black artists in the Golden Age can't be told just by looking at the screen. Born in 1905 in Brooksville, Mississippi, and raised in St. Louis after his father's death, he was staging neighborhood shows as a teenager before most kids his age had ever seen a play. In 1936, he moved to New York, worked days as a lab assistant, and studied acting at night. Within a few years, he was on stage with the Civic Repertory Theater, and in 1944, he exploded onto Broadway in Anna Lucasta, winning a trio of major theater awards for his performance. He wasn't just good for a black actor. He was simply one of the most acclaimed performers of the season. What O'Neal did next changed black theater forever. Frustrated with the humiliating roles on offer, he co-founded the American Negro Theater in Harlem in 1940, a company that would launch the careers of Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, Ruby Dee, and Alice Childress, among others. Later, he helped start the British Negro Theater in London. On screen, he appeared in films like Pinky No Way Out and Something of Value. And on television, he became familiar to audiences through drama's Hallmark Hall of Fame specials and the sitcom Car 54 Where Are You? But his most radical work happened off-stage. He served as president of the Negro Actors Guild, then from 1964 to 1973, as the first black president of the Actors Equity Association, fighting to end discrimination in casting and to secure fair treatment for performers. His advocacy was so effective that his name ended up on President Nixon's infamous enemies list. Unlike some of his contemporaries in this larger conversation, Frederick O'Neal did not leave behind a clearly queer narrative. He married Charlotte Talbot Haney, and she survived him when he died in New York in 1992 at the age of 86. His place in the story of erased black stars is different, but just as important. While others had their sexuality straightened out or buried, O'Neal had his power minimized. He was a brilliant character actor, a builder of institutions, and a union leader who changed the conditions under which black performers worked. Yet his name is rarely spoken outside specialist circles. In the bright, narrow spotlight of Hollywood history, he's another figure pushed into the wings, proof that erasure isn't only about who you love, but how much of your impact the world is allowed to remember. Napoleon Whiting. Napoleon Whiting is a perfect example of how a black performer can be visible everywhere and still almost vanish from history. Born in Canton, Mississippi in 1910, he left the South as a young man to chase an acting career first in New York and eventually in Hollywood. There, from the 1940s through the late 1970s, he became a classic studio-era utility actor, always working, rarely credited, almost never truly seen. He appeared in more than 100 film and television roles, usually as a servant, porter, chauffeur, or handyman characters that reflected exactly how limited Hollywood's imagination was when it came to black men. Every so often, though, he slipped into something bigger. In Giant, 1956, the widescreen Texas epic with Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and James Dean Whiting played Jefferson Swayze, the black butler, quietly orbiting a rich white family in a story that pretended race was changing while still keeping black characters in the background. Later television audiences came to know him as Silas, the dignified family retainer on the Western series The Big Valley, 1965 to 1969. Week after week, he was there in living rooms across America, a steady presence who made the Barclay Mansion feel like a real household, even if the scripts rarely let him be more than loyal and discreet. What we don't have for Napoleon? Whiting is a clear, documented queer narrative, and that matters if we're being honest. There are modern gossip sites speculating about his sexuality, but no solid evidence, no interviews, no partners named in the record. What is indisputable is the pattern his life represents. A black actor in the golden age confined almost entirely to servile roles, his inner world kept off-screen and off the books. In a conversation about black, gay, and queer stars, Hollywood erased Whiting stands as a cautionary figure. His story reminds us how easy it is to project queerness onto every silent single black man in old films, and how at the same time the industry's racism and typecasting erased so much of who he could have been, regardless of who he loved. Avon Long. Avon Long is one of those performers whose fingerprints are all over 20th century black entertainment, even if most people can't quite place his name. Born in Baltimore in 1910, he grew up in a working-class black neighborhood and discovered early that his body and voice could get him out. After high school, he chased opportunity North Landing in Harlem in the late 1920s. There, he learned his craft in the crucible of black performance, the Lafayette Theater, the Cotton Club revues like Hot Chocolates, and the legendary Cotton Club shows where he sang, danced, and traded energy with band leaders like Cab Calloway and a teenage Lena Horne. By the early 1940s, he'd become best known for his sly electric turn as Sportin' Life in the Broadway revival of Porgy and Bess, a role he would return to again and again on stage and on record. Long's career never stood still. Across the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, he moved between Broadway film and television with a flexibility that was rare for a black performer of his generation. He appeared in shows like Beggar's Holiday, Don't Play Us Cheap, and Bubbling Brown Sugar, even contributing as a writer on the last one and in mid-century movie musicals and dramas, where he might only get a specialty number but always made it count. Late in life, he slipped into pop culture history in a different way, as the small but unforgettable characters he played in films like The Sting and Trading Places, the guy at the periphery of the frame who somehow walks away with the scene. In 1973, he earned a Tony nomination for his performance in Don't Play Us Cheap, a rare moment when the establishment spotlight swung briefly in his direction. Unlike some of his contemporaries in this loose constellation of erased black stars, Avon Long's private life is less mysterious than simply private. We know he married Gretchen Cotton and had children. We know he kept working almost up to his death from cancer in 1984. What's missing from the record isn't a scandalous hidden self, but the level of recognition his artistry earned. He was a bridge figure between Harlem nightclub culture and Broadway, between the big band era and New Hollywood, yet he's usually reduced to a footnote. In any attempt to reconstruct the real, messy, glorious landscape of black talent around Hollywood's golden age, Avon Long deserves to step out of the chorus and take a bow in the spotlight he rarely got while he was alive. Percy Rodriguez. Percy Rodriguez. Born. Percy Rodriguez had the kind of presence that made you sit up a little straighter even if you didn't know his name. Born in Montreal in 1918 to a family of Afro-Portuguese heritage, he grew up in the working-class Saint-Henri neighborhood, boxing and hustling odd jobs to help support his mother and siblings after his father left. Acting began as a side Dream Community Theater small productions, but he was good enough to win a National Drama Award in 1939. For years, he split himself in two, toolmaker by day, at an aircraft factory actor by night, with Montreal's Negro Theatre Guild. Only in his 40s did he finally lean fully into the career that would make his face, and especially his voice, unforgettable. On stage, a simple misprint in a Broadway program turned Rodriguez into Rodriguez, and the new spelling stuck as his professional name. On television, he quietly exploded barriers. In the 1960s, he started showing up everywhere. Route 66 Naked City, The Wild Wild West, Mission Impossible. In 1967, he appeared in Star Trek as Commodore Stone, the first black actor to play a flag officer in that universe. A year later, he joined the prime-time soap Peyton Place as neurosurgeon Dr. Harry Miles, a black doctor treating white patients in one of TV's most watched shows, so unusual at the time that newspapers ran headlines just on the fact of his casting. Over the next 2 decades, he became a specialist in roles that radiated calm authority: judges, surgeons, politicians, men whose intelligence could not be written off. Then there was The Voice. Deep-controlled, slightly ominous Percy Rodriguez became one of the great unseen stars of 1970s and 80s movie marketing. His narration helped define the mood of trailers for films like Jaws and many other thrillers, horror films, and blockbusters. For a generation of audiences, his voice was the sound of something big about to happen. In private, his life was far more conventional than the mystery suggested by that baritone he married, raised 2 children, and stayed largely out of gossip columns. When he died in 2007, at 89 obituaries praised him as a symbol of intelligence and moral strength on screen, a black actor who, in an era of crippling stereotypes, insisted on being seen as a man in charge. In discussions about how black presence in the Golden Age and its aftermath was minimized or flattened, Percy Rodriguez stands as proof that sometimes erasure isn't about absence but about how quietly a barrier breaker can be written into the background. Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte's life sits at the crossroads of fame, politics, and a very deliberate kind of courage. Born Harold George Belafonte Jr. in Harlem in 1927 to Jamaican parents, he spent part of his childhood in Jamaica before returning to New York, serving in the U.S. Navy during World War II, and discovering acting at the American Negro Theater alongside Sidney Poitier. In the 1950s, he exploded into global stardom with Calypso 1956, the first LP by a single artist to sell over 1 million copies. Day-O. The Banana Boat song turned him into the king of Calypso, while films like Carmen Jones and Island in the Sun made him one of the first black leading men to carry major Hollywood productions. On television, his 1960 special Tonight with Belafonte earned him a Primetime Emmy, making him the first black American man to win in a leading performer category. But Belafonte's true legend was never just about hits and headlines. He treated celebrity as a weapon for justice. A close friend and confidant of Martin Luther King Jr., he raised money for the civil rights movement, hosted strategy meetings in his New York apartment, helped fund the 1963 March on Washington, and quietly paid bail for jailed activists when the cameras weren't looking. As time went on, he broadened that work to the world stage, campaigning against apartheid in South Africa, serving as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador, and speaking out against war, poverty, and authoritarianism. Even into his 80s and 90s, he remained a sharp, sometimes scathing moral voice, criticizing presidents, challenging younger artists to think beyond awards and chart positions, and reminding everyone that art without conscience was just decoration. In the story of black queer history around the Golden Age, Harry Belafonte's role is different from that of closeted actors and coded love stories. There is no credible evidence that he was gay or bisexual. Instead, he stands out as a consistently outspoken ally. He supported HIV/AIDS work-backed organizations fighting for LGBTQ+ rights and used his status as a civil rights elder to argue that justice had to include queer people, not stop at race. While other black stars of his era had their sexuality straightened out, denied, or buried, Belafonte chose to stand beside them rather than apart from them. In a landscape where Hollywood often demanded silence, he was one of the rare straight icons who refused to leave queer people behind, and that, in its own way, is a different kind of radical legacy. History likes clean lines. Real lives are never that simple. Some of these stars left clear evidence of same-sex love, others moved in queer circles without naming it, and a few, like Harry Belafonte, stood beside them as fierce allies rather than lovers. What links them isn't a label we can pin down decades later, but the pattern, black brilliance, queer possibility, and an industry that kept both at arm's length. At Legends of Black Excellence, we're not here to invent gossip. We're here to ask harder questions. So you tell me, where does honoring truth end and speculation begin?